Okay, first I'd like to thank Bhante Piyananda for giving me the honor to speak this afternoon, and also I'm privileged to have the presence of many venerable members of the Sangha, both Bikkhu and Bhikkhuni Sangha, as well as a number of old friends and other people that I've met for the first time today. You know, before I left for Sri Lanka in 1972, I was living in Los Angeles. At the time, I lived in Los Angeles from 1971 through 1972. And in fact, I departed for Sri Lanka from the Los Angeles airport. Since then, I only passed through Los Angeles for one day back, I think it was about 1980 or 81, when I was traveling up to Northern California. So this is the first time that I've really been back in Los Angeles since I left, with the glowing idea of becoming ordained as a monk in Sri Lanka. And at the time that I left, I think there might have been 2 or 3 Buddhist temples in Los Angeles, maybe a few more. There was, of course, the old Japanese temples and Chinese temples. There was a Vietnamese meditation center, a couple of Zen centers, and pretty much that was it. And I still remember when the first Thai restaurant opened up in Los Angeles. And I also remember when we heard this rather startling news that the Thai temple was opening up in outside Los Angeles. And it was something astonishing. Is there really going to be a Thai temple with Thai monks in Los Angeles? And now I hear that there's something like, you told me this morning?
Over 20 in Los Angeles.
Over 20 Thai temples in Los Angeles. And how many Sri Lankan temples? 10 Sri Lankan temples in the Los Angeles area. And probably Vietnamese, Burmese, Cambodian, Lao, Tibetan, every variety of Buddhist temples, monasteries. I want to approach the topic of my talk, which is a path of guidance suitable for our times, with a little account of my own personal background and development in Buddhism. Okay, I first became interested in Buddhism when I was in the last year of college. I went to college at Brooklyn College. And in those days, Buddhism was becoming something like a subject for exploration by a certain group of people who generally would have not shaved heads, but extremely long hair and beards. They would call them a little bit in the intermediate stage between the Beat generation and the hippies. And so I was part of that generation, and I felt that one of the subjects that I had to learn about was Buddhism. And so I found some books on Buddhism, read them, and my interest was aroused. Then when I went to graduate school in Claremont, California, it turned out that a Buddhist monk from Vietnam came to live in the same residence hall where I was living, and so I became friends with him. And that provided the kind of incentive for me to think about becoming a monk myself. While I was living in Los Angeles, I met a well-known Sri Lankan monk who was passing through the United States. Probably some of you old-timers would know him. This was Venerable Piyadasi Mahatera. And then he became my connection to Sri Lanka. And so when I decided to go to Sri Lanka to ordain, I wrote to Venerable Piyadasi and told him my intention, and then he suggested that I take ordination from another elderly Sri Lankan monk, again, whom some of you might know. This was Venerable Balangoda Ananda Maitreya. I learned from Venerable Piyananda yesterday that Venerable Ananda Maitreya spent long periods of time, perhaps 4 years, you said?
No, 8 years.
8 years in total at Dharma Vijaya Vihara. Okay, when I set out on my quest for the Dhamma, my life as a monk, I regarded it primarily as a personal quest. I thought that the world was in a state of hopeless chaos, and my own sort of motivation for seeking the Dhamma was to obtain my own personal wisdom, my own, quote, enlightenment. When I went to Sri Lanka, I thought I studied the Buddhist text for a year, go off to meditate for 2 or 3 years, get enlightened, and then come back and become the first patriarch of American Buddhism. It turned out to be a bit more difficult than I expected. And nowadays, the idea of a patriarch in Buddhism would arouse more resentment than admiration. But as I spent more time in Sri Lanka over the years, my understanding of the Dhamma started to develop, evolve, and undergo transformations in certain important respects. And I found myself at that time, and even during my first years back in the United States, struggling with certain questions that I'm sure that many Westerners who are attracted to Buddhism have to face. Okay, one was the question, like, what is the nature of Buddhism itself? You know, when one gets beneath the outer surface of bright-colored robes, of Buddha images, of the ceremonies, chanting in different languages, is it really just essentially a religion or spiritual discipline of personal liberation, personal awakening, withdrawal from the cosmic process, from all involvement with society? Or does it have the potential for some other function in the world? A function of providing a set of guiding ideals for people who are interested in transforming and elevating our society and our world. A related question is the pragmatic aim of the Dharma: inner peace, inner happiness, and equanimity? Or at a certain point, do we have to emerge from this kind of personal and private quest and develop a wider perspective, a kind of social conscience, which can see that part of our responsibility as followers of the Dhamma is to promote the good of others and also to promote those kinds of ideals, principles, guidelines that can elevate our community, our social life, and the world as a whole. And often the way I see Buddhism being developed and practiced in America, especially amongst what they call self-converted American Buddhists, it seems almost to be following the track of a discipline or a practice aimed at inner peace and inner self-knowledge or self-awakening. So we see these days a lot of emphasis on experiments in mindfulness. People go on long-term meditation retreats and show very little interest in what is going on around them in the wider world. And so there's a grave danger here, I think, that Buddhism can become almost a way of enabling one to adapt to a very unjust, destructive, parasitical social and economic system, so that one develops this kind of equanimity, so whatever happens, one just thinks, that's the way it is, this is the nature of things. And then one just flows along with the current of social, economic, political self-destruction of our society, rather than standing up to resist it. Some years ago, there was a critique of Western Buddhism by a very astute European philosopher. His name is Zizek, Z-I-Z-E-K, EC, I think, Slavoj Žižek. And he doesn't know Buddhism that well, but he's a very astute observer of Western society. And he pointed out that for many in the West, the kind of Western adaptation of Buddhism might be the perfect way for capitalism, for corporate capitalism, to sustain itself, because it enables us to sort of flow along with the current of corporate capitalism without seeing anything essentially pernicious, destructive, unhealthy within that system. Okay, still another issue that I had to struggle with and still haven't perfectly resolved, and that is the nature of Buddhist ethics. You know, when we start off with fundamental Buddhist ethics, we have 5 precepts, which are principles of restraint. Then as we move into monastic precepts, or to monastic life, we take on more and more precepts. And so again, we have this question, is the essential nature of Buddhist ethics restraint, self-discipline, self-control, abstaining from one type of unwholesome action, another type of unwholesome action? Or can we draw out from Buddhist ethics a positive core, a core that will serve as a spur to effective, positive, powerful, transformative action? The types of ethical values that take on an active, altruistic dimension. And then of course we can bring up the point that Buddhism places a great deal of emphasis on such qualities as metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion. But note that there's, I would say, almost a distorted way in which even these values are being practiced in the West. And that is that they are pursued, again, as inner subjective states because they make one feel good, they make one feel happy. So when one develops, love and compassion, one could sit quietly in one's little meditation room or in a meditation center and be developing the wish, the heart, may all beings be well, may they be happy, may they be free from all harm, free from all suffering. And one can go to one's loved ones, one's neutral people, hostile people, till one is radiating, suffusing the whole world with these thoughts of loving kindness and compassion. And all of this is beautiful, wholesome, wonderful. But I would say that if one develops loving kindness and compassion purely as inner subjective states, one is diminishing their capacity to serve as spurs to action, spurs to transforming one's environment, one's world, in accordance with, I would say, the categorical imperatives that come out from loving kindness and compassion. The imperative to actually promote the real, concrete, tangible well-being and happiness of others. The imperative to act, to alleviate the pain and suffering of others. So I would say that there are these 2 aspects of loving kindness and compassion which have to be balanced. One is the inner development, which is pure, worthy, admirable, and wholesome, but also the need for action that expresses